All right, so you're in New Haven. You're 17, 18, whatever it is, 16, 17, 18.
Yeah.
What's the path now? Did you say to yourself, I want to be a professional musician? And how do you go about doing that? Because it's not an easy thing.
No.
Certainly if you want to say, all right, I'm going to play in a wedding band, or I'm going to be the guy who plays guitar for the, Temptations or something like that. It's a different vibe. But if you say, I'm going to pursue an artistic path,
Yeah.
what was your move? How did you make that work?
Well, it's important to know that by that time, by 15, 16, and this is no slight on my parents who did the best that they could with me, I was supporting myself and working. And by 17, I dropped out of the alternative high school and got a full-time job at a hamburger joint.
Mm-hmm.
And, I had already moved out of my house. In a lot of ways, I think of myself as like a feral kid.
Sure.
I really, there was reason for me to be on my own, but I was on my own. I had, my parents weren't capable of giving me basically any kind of support, even though they were beautiful people. They couldn't do it. And so it was a matter of like surviving day to day and working. So, my sort of goal was partly just to crawl up from the very bottom. I would say that the only thing that kept me from being on like in a worse situation was, quite frankly, the fact that I didn't have to be, I wasn't shut out of opportunities in life because of, my race or anything like that. As a white kid, I could get a job and I could walk down the street without people being suspicious of me. Otherwise, it was pretty low.
Yeah.
So I just worked. I worked and I tried to sort out what was going to be the thing to get me out of that situation into something better. And at the time, I was like when I was a little kid and a teenager, I was pretty funny and I was a really good mimic. And I was really interested in movies and I read books about film and I was really into art. In New Haven, we could go to the Yale Art Gallery and stand in front of, Jackson Pollock paintings, at like 15 years old for free. And I did that a lot. And I was trying to figure out which artistic direction was right for me. And it just seemed to me that the free jazz thing was the best one because it was the most do-it-yourself.
Sure.
This was pre-punk music. There was no punk rock then. That came a little bit later. And there's a chance that if I had not gone the direction I went in, I might have gone to that. Although I didn't really, the sort of, motorcycle jacket kind of punk guy kind of vibe didn't really appeal to me,
Sure.
like artistically or socially.
Yeah,
I was much more of a kind of a psychedelic kind of person. I wasn't really, I looked like a hippie, but I wasn't a hippie. I was more like a long-haired beatnik in a lot of ways.
Sure.
I liked that more. And
Yeah.
and I was interested in positive things like art and, words and music. And when I found out things like Albert Eiler and when I discovered that people like Leo Smith were making their own records and that you could really kind of direct yourself completely in this area of music, I just decided, like, I remember making the decision, I'm going in that way and I'm going to see what happens. I'm going to work really hard to try to succeed in that.
Yeah.
And it was like a very clear decision. And it's really kind of audacious and like crazy and insane. But I would say by the time I was 18 years old, I had from influences I had this sort of idea that I was going to be, a free jazz guitarist, which was not a thing you could declare about yourself back then. There were a few people in the world who did it. And I still thought there were things that were going on in it that hadn't been done, and I worked really hard to draw on the influence that I didn't influences I thought weren't being used by some of those people.
Sure. Well, give me some examples of those.
Well, there was Sonny Sharrock, who was great, and there was Derek Bailey, two, kind of opposite poles of that. And, I worked really hard to understand what they were doing and to find what they weren't doing.
Yeah.
There were people who would compare me to both of them, which I take as a compliment, but they would compare me negatively, of course, which I also take as a compliment.
Sure.
And I drew on different things, and so I had this kind of ridiculous idea that I would build up this way of playing the guitar that would probably give me a gig.
Sure.
It's
But
insane.
But at this point, you're saying to yourself, what can I do to craft my own
Yeah.
approach that's
Yeah.
going to sort of forge my own path through the thing, or the path
Exactly.
less traveled, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So what was it that they were doing that you, I don't know what the best way to put this is, but what was it they were doing that you either wanted to do, or where did you find that open space? Like, what was it that you were thinking about?
I'll tell you exactly.
Great.
Sonny, who's great, is essentially a free modal guitar player.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it doesn't mean that he's worried, that he's concerned with playing a Phrygian mode or a Dorian mode. But the fact is that his playing was modal in that you could hear that there was at least an implied root.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's kind of post Coltrane, which I love, and I admire anybody who can play like that. And Sonny Sharrock was incredible, but there were also loads of modal guitar players in that period. John McLaughlin being the towering,
Sure.
monolithic master of that. So that was covered. To do it in the free modal kind of way, well, that was Sonny's. It was Sonny's space. Derek, on the other hand, was basically using sounds and using harmonics and what I already knew at the time were called, extended techniques. And so one of them has a driving sense of pulse, late modal jazz, free jazz, driving sense of pulse, some Albert Ayler sort of stuff in there, of course, which is great. And not to diminish or simplify any of that at all, but it was identifiable. I could define it as being a thing, especially in contrast to other things.
Sure.
And then there's Derek, and at the time, I might feel a little bit differently about it now. There's sort of like no pulse, and there's like not about melody, and it's not about energy, and it's not about groove, and it's not about drive. So there's a bunch of extremes. The thing that I found that wasn't really being dealt with at the time was Cecil.
Okay.
On the guitar. And, flash decades ahead, I had a conversation about this with Cecil Taylor, and he's like, well, what about Sonny Sharrock? Or he would say, well, what about Sonny Sharrock? And I said, well, Sonny's like a free modal guitar player. And he went like to me, like, and you? And I said, well, I'm trying to deal with unit structures. I'm trying to deal with you and Jimmy. And so Jimmy Lyons was like my hero, early from 20 around on, and for a long time, but also Eric Dolphy.
Yeah.
Because guitar players didn't deal with Eric Dolphy. And while other saxophone players of the time, the alto players, there was this huge expansion of music from the alto saxophone. You got Ornette, you got Jimmy Lyons, you got Dolphy, you got later on, you get Braxton, Roscoe Mitchell, you had Oliver Lake, you had Julius Hemphill. There's just all this stuff going on. And I'm thinking, where's the guitar players dealing with this stuff?
Sure.
And, again, to give credit to someone like Michael Gregory Jackson, he was dealing with it, and he had his own area he was dealing with. And so I don't want to go into that. I want to leave people alone out of respect for what they do. But I didn't think that anybody could really do unit structures on the guitar.
Sure.
So I worked for a really long time. Once I figured that out, I was like, I know what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
And the first record I ever made, which was in 1983, is shows that. There was a bunch of things like that had like kind of a blues sensibility, but were also sort of a unit structures kind of thing. And I was really influenced by Leroy Jenkins, the violinist, and the Revolutionary Ensemble, his group, and by Threadgill and Fred Hopkins and Steve McCall, their group Air was hugely important to me. And so I found some things that I thought informed my way of thinking that were connected. And of course, Albert Ayler was big in that. But it's very hard to play like Albert Ayler on the guitar because, it just, you need breath.
There's a lot of air.
There's a lot of air. But those things were present in the structure, in the sort of methodology that was being used in all that music I just mentioned. And
Sure.
and a lot of it comes from Cecil Taylor. I mean, most of it, and Sonny Murray and Jimmy Lyons. And so
Yeah.
I kind of did, in a way, what I later learned Steve Lacy did, which was I took a lot of the principles of that and I started composing things to put myself in more specific, more personal kind of situations so that I had a kind of general methodology I worked in, and then I composed things to make specific sort of templates to work off of in my own composition. And then I started thinking about building up a whole sort of support system for my guitar thing, which again is the kind of thing I learned. And, you know, worked my job as a cab driver or a bartender or a house painter or a babysitter or a construction worker. I worked as a technical assistant at a film company. I became a piano mover and a furniture mover and a truck driver. And, I did every kind of work I could do to support my determination to be a musician. So, like I was saying before, I decided I was going to be a free guitar player, and which wasn't a thing really at the time. I had friends who told me about New England Conservatory, where at the time Rand Blake was like a kind of beacon of some different thinking.
Yeah.
I think he still is, but at the time there was him, there was Bill Dixon. That's it.
Sure.
There was nobody teaching anything like that. So
Yeah.
I couldn't have gotten into NEC, but I thought, man, that's a cool place. And, I noticed that people I admired like Don Cherry and Anthony Braxton and, Coltrane and people like that, they had like regular lives. They had families and kids, and you see pictures of them with their kids.
Yeah.
I was like, wait a minute, you could do this and have like a regular life, have a happy family.
Yeah.
And, in high school, I would come out here to Guilford, where I live, because we knew people that lived out here, teachers from the school and relatives of some of the students. They lived out here out in the woods in these like kind of weird houses, and they were artists and writers and stuff. And so by the time I was like 17, which is, when I had already dropped out of school, I had this idea, well, I'm going to be a free jazz guitarist who has a family. I'm going to teach at New England Conservatory, and I'm going to live in Guilford, Connecticut. And I can't say there was a point where I planned any of that to happen except the guitar thing. But the guitar thing made all those other things happen.
That's amazing.
It's amazing. It really, it's a miracle. It's a miracle. The NEC thing is an absolute miracle.
Sure. Yeah.
And, it's one of the reasons I take it so like as such a precious thing, because it's like a miracle. But I actually did imagine those things. So I guess part of it is just imagining that some of these things mean something.